Hello, G fans. Today I'm doing the 14th episode of the Kaiju Dissection, and for this for this dissection, I'm doing a show film and one of my favorite Godzilla films of all time. I said time and time again, it's on my top 10 list, and I'm talking about the fifth film in the Toho universe of Godzilla, and that would be Ghidorah Three-Headed Monster. Ghidorah Monster was released in December of 1964, the same year as Mothra vs. Godzilla, which came out back in April. For any who are curious, the Japanese title of it, literally translated, is Three Giant Monsters, the Greatest Battle on Earth. And a very fitting title and a very epic title at that. But many people simply know it as Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, although I myself know it specifically as Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, because as I probably said before, this is one of the first Godzilla movies I ever saw in my life, followed quickly by Godzilla vs. Megalon and other Showa films. And yeah, I posted in the thumbnail of the video, back my VHS copy, the original, clearly says Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, but now, years later, now that Godzilla films are kind of resurging again, pretty much anywhere you look, whether it be DVDs, Blu-rays, online, Ghidorah Three-Headed Monster, also you put Ghidorah Three-Headed Monster, which is definitely the correct way, but still at the same time, it kind of makes you miss the classic mistakes. But it's actually a good thing that they spell it right, because that can be very fucking annoying. With that said, let's get to this movie and why, to me, it's one of the best Godzilla movies. I've always held this one in high regard, and it's definitely what you would definitely call the Avengers before the Avengers came out. And I say that in terms of this is one of the first, well, at least in my experience anyways, crossovers I ever watched as far as movies go and popular characters. All the time I first saw it, I didn't really know it was a crossover. I didn't know that Rodan and Mothra had their own movies before this. But now that I'm an experienced kaiju fan, I know that full well. And so I realized how tremendously epic this film was when it came out, and it is to this day. And that's why I'm so glad Godzilla 2018, the American sequel, is going to follow this concept, I assume, because they're using the exact same monster lineup, which to me is just freaking fantastic. Now, some of this kaiju dissection in the short way, and why is the movie so great? Well, like I said, this is one of the first kaiju movies I ever saw, the first Godzilla movie I ever saw for sure. And then right after this, I saw Godzilla vs. Megalon. Now, even as a 7, 8-year-old boy watching these films like back to back, I noticed so many things are different. Normally, first off, Ghidorah the Monster is longer. Ghidorah the Monster has more epic shots, a better story, and yeah, just a lot more color to it as opposed to something Godzilla vs. Megalon, which is drab, boring. An interesting score, but not really captivating, and a plot that is nowhere near as epic and keeps you as entertained as this one does. I know some people criticize it over the years for certain things, like adding elements of campiness to the story and the seemingly disconnected monster and human action, but I'm explaining why all the things work, in my opinion, and like I said, why it holds up. So now I've been over my brief history with the movie, and once again, every time I speak of this movie, I have to thank Classic Media for releasing on that awesome freaking DVD edition. I love that bookcase. I love how it comes both the Japanese and English versions, which are different enough ways that I can watch both and get a different experience out of them, but also both are very enjoyable. Not like Gigantic the Fire Monster, one's painful, and then Godzilla Raids Again, which is mildly painful. So I should start with the story, and this is definitely where the Avengers kicks in, because what better way to unite any characters, whether it be comic books, movies, than to have simply a freaking mashup between aliens and Earth's heroes, and that's the basic summary of the story. Okay, so the plot in the more detailed covering of it would simply be this. A princess from I believe, fictional country. I don't believe it's ever officially named. But in any case, she is trying to travel to Japan, I believe, to escape assassins in her home country. However, her plane does not make it because it is apparently there was a bomb on board. At the same time, a meteorite crashes into Japan. Hmm. Meanwhile, the next day, a Venusian prophet appears in Japan. Although in the US version they switched it to Mars. I guess just because Mars is more familiar to people, but yeah, minor difference between American and Japanese translations. But yeah, the princess reappears. At least they think it's the princess, but the person claims to be, like I said, a Venusian prophet who prophesies the return of Godzilla and Rodan to Japan to wreak havoc, and also the coming of King Ghidorah. So the Japanese police force end up sending a detective after her. At the same time, the assassins are also not done with her. They still attempt to kill her, whether they, are sure it's a princess or not. And then, of course, Godzilla and Rodan do eventually wreak havoc, and King Ghidorah himself finally appears, which is when Mothra tries to intervene and unite the monsters to stop the ultimate bigger threat. And that is the plot in a nutshell. To go even deeper into the plot, it turns out the princess and the Venusian prophet are actually one and the same, because it turns out the Venusians were wiped out by King Ghidorah many, many years ago, and then they escaped their doomed planet, arrived on Earth, interbred with the human people to the extent that it finally thinned their blood, where they forgot their heritage, and she finally taps into that somehow upon the assassination attempt on the plane, which led her to surviving it. And yeah. So the human story is interesting. Uh, and like many people have said, no, it does not connect, uh, dot to dot with the monster storyline. They kind of just exist together, but they do intertwine at times where certain things the monsters do affect the human storylines. Usually indirectly through a fight or something of that nature, but to me that works just fine. Humans don't need to directly influence the outcome of the fight like they did maybe later films like Godzilla vs. Hedorah. So to me, it's a fun story. It works pretty well. All the pseudoscience and whatnot, it's entertaining. While definitely kind of cheesy and whatnot, it's entertaining, which is what counts. And backing up this, zany story is just really a great classic Toho cast. We have Yosuke Natsuki as main detective Shindo. We have Yuriko Hoshi, who had just appeared in Mothra vs. Godzilla as a similar reporter character. She's great. We have Hiroshi Kazumi as appearing, I think, yeah, he was also in Mothra vs. Godzilla, playing once again a professor. We have Takashi Shimura appearing, who he had appeared in Godzilla Raids again, but a very minor role, but most people simply know him from Godzilla, the original movie, 1954. Voice of Akihiko Hirata from the original Godzilla movie, although he's basically just Shindo's boss. He appears very briefly in the beginning of the movie. We also have Kenji Sahara, and we have the Peanuts as the Shobijin, the Peanuts who would play the Mothra fairy twins in the previous film, although I'm pretty sure, I think it was them in Godzilla Sea Monster. Actually, no, it was not. I could tell they looked too different. It wasn't them, but at least for these two first films in 1964, they would appear as Mothra's priestess. And don't forget, good old Haru Nakajima as Godzilla in this. But of course, he played Godzilla basically during the entirety of the Showa era, so yeah, it almost goes without saying. But the cast is really good. Is it as deep and, I don't want to say complex, but deep and humanly relevant? I hate to use that stupid word, but like Mothra vs. Godzilla was about the conflict between man and greed? Not entirely, but still it's a pretty relevant theme, and that would be unification of mankind against greater enemies, which is what King Ghidorah represents, obviously. Also, aside that theme that the film has about unification, uh, the human storyline is kept up with an interesting plot. We have interesting characters. We have both, subtle comedic moments as well as some hard hitting action like shootout scenes and things of that nature. And that's what makes a movie cool. It makes it really entertaining, even to me as a 9-year-old boy who had to wait, a long time for Godzilla and Rodan to appear, and even King Ghidorah, who appears much later on near the climax of the film. So those things definitely matter. Adding the right amount of humans and monsters and the right amount of action in between, and with the right balance, like this movie hit, it can work out really well. Uh, Going to the monsters, I guess I'll start with Godzilla. This Godzilla suit is the same exact one from Mothra vs. Godzilla, in every way except for the face, and that's where it counts. And even the face itself is pretty much almost exactly the same. The main difference being the eyes were remodeled. And Mothra vs. Godzilla had the classic, basically no white showing at all, kind of really dark eyes. They were made from material, I believe, from just basically glass. So the pupils didn't move at all. They had a much fiercer and deeper look to them. Like you just, because they would stare you in the face and it would just strike fear and wow, an image of power. And this basically kind of got look Godzilla's eyes would have in movies like Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, way back. I mean, way later in the '90s. This Godzilla movie gives Godzilla animatronic eyes, which at times move around, and they have a lot more white in them, which gives them, of course, a much less threatening look. And it's basically, to show that Godzilla is moving towards humanity's side. Although, not to be confused, Godzilla in this movie is definitely not a hero yet. He's basically an anti-hero. When Godzilla first appears in this movie, the first thing he does is kill an entire cruise ship of people. Don't forget. Yeah, so overall, to me, Godzilla's characterized and still looks pretty good. Like I said, the eyes are not as impressive as the earlier 1964 film Mothra vs. Godzilla, but it's not bad at all, though. Still, it's a very memorable suit, and I think the Godzilla the game was definitely going more for this look, the latter 1964, because he has the same eyes. Although once again, they kind of screwed the pooch on that, but I'm not getting into that. So with that said, Godzilla is pretty good. Even like the fact that Godzilla is definitely more like the he's definitely more of like just the rugged anti-hero in this, because you notice later on during the Monster Summit scene in both the Japanese and American dub, while monsters are conversing and the fairies are translating, Godzilla is the only one of the monsters to actually curse, which is just funny. I mean, it's kind of dumb, of course, but at the same time, it's funny. It just made me just admire Godzilla's character even more. It was just very amusing. I just love that. Next, I'll cover Rodan. Rodan basically takes a similar path to Godzilla, although I don't think he directly kills anybody, so we see. Once again, it's implied that he is once again a force of nature, and he's definitely on humanity's side when he first appears. In fact, Godzilla and Rodan's only point. Godzilla and Rodan's main goal when they first appear in the movie is simply to kill the shit out of each other, which to me was a great dynamic. Uh, they would not be enemies for the rest of the show or series. Basically, in Invasion of Astro Monster and Destroy All Monsters, when Rodan appeared, he'd be on Godzilla's side automatically. They would not be enemies again until Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in 1993. And to me, it's great. It made a very great dynamic between each other because Godzilla is a terrestrial, presumably stronger foe, but Rodan has a speed advantage, and for the most part, especially in this movie, Rodan's about the same size as Godzilla. In the Heisei era, Rodan would be a lot smaller than Godzilla and would pretty much get his ass kicked. But he was still great in that movie. But that's another review for another time. The fighting, I'll get to the special effects of the fight, but the fights here are very energetic and they look and feel great. As far as Rodan's actual looks, like I said before, it's a downward trend for Rodan in the Showa era, which is kind of sad when you think about it. But right here, Rodan doesn't look too bad. Like in 1956, Rodan looked freaking badass. had the very dark and very small eyes that were very threatening and but majestic at the same time. And then we have this Rodan, who appeared almost a decade later, 1964, who definitely doesn't look bad, but when you compare this one to 1956, it's just not the same at all. But like Godzilla, it's going for a friendlier look. And then by 1968, just forget it. Just fucking forget it. But moving on, going to Mothra, the Mothra larva does not look basically any different than it did in the previous film, Mothra vs. Godzilla. I just thought it was interesting to note that they had one of the Mothra larvae die off in the time that went between this movie and the last one. I mean, I think in terms of, something dramatic, like, I don't know if they'll do it in Godzilla 2018, but I think it would have been more interesting, really, writing-wise, to have one of the Mothra larvae die during the battle with Ghidorah. That would have been freaking interesting, right? That would have been freaking amazing. But however, we don't get that, of course. It just died in the years before, and we're not entirely sure why. They just say it died, leaving only one Mothra larva. But that's a small thing. It's dumb. I just always think about. But in any case, Mothra larva, no complaints. Looks just like it did last one, and it moves all right. Just stiff from certain shots. And then, of course, we have King Ghidorah, who finally debuts in this movie. Not as a not as a separate character who appears all movie, but no, this is the first time he appeared in the Godzilla franchise, and this is when he began his long career as Godzilla's arch nemesis. That's right, other than Mothra, who was sometimes Godzilla's ally, but really only in the Showa era, and I guess in Final Wars. But King Ghidorah is basically the monster who appears the most, besides Mothra, like I said, second place. But every single time King Ghidorah has appeared, it has been as the enemy of Godzilla. Usually it's the worst evil between the two, except for in GMK where Ghidorah was actually a good guy and Godzilla was just the ultimate asshole. But yeah, I love the I love the show of King Ghidorah. It just looks fantastic. A lot of people should know by now, a lot of special effects work went into recreating this monster in the early franchise. It took many people to operate the wings, the wild necks, the tails. There's still a man inside the suit itself to move its legs as it walks around when it's on the ground. It's an incredible achievement. And just the overall design is just great as well. I mean, the golden scales, the humongous wings that take up the entire frame at times, the towering look. It's taller than Godzilla, basically any other Showa monster. And also that classic roar, the ringing of the bells it was described as in this early script. And King Ghidorah has not had that roar since. In the Heisei era, Ghidorah had a modified Rodan roar, and in the Millennium series, GMK tried to redo this classic roar, although not to the same effect, but it was still good. And then, some people include Kaiser Ghidorah as a Ghidorah, true Ghidorah, some people don't. But either way, it didn't sound or look like King Ghidorah really, except for a few features they shared. So yeah, this King Ghidorah definitely had the best roar out of all the King Ghidorahs, mysterious and just odd, and that's what made King Ghidorah so interesting. And of course, King Ghidorah has a very energetic look to him, unlike when they mutilated him in Godzilla vs. Gigan. But that's a review for another time. King Ghidorah looks fantastic, and on an interesting note, the original King Ghidorah was to have purple scales, rainbow curved wings, and would breathe fire instead of the lightning-looking gravity beams. While that would have been interesting, I'm very glad they went with this look. Something else unique to this King Ghidorah that we pretty much wouldn't see ever again would be the lion-like manes each individual head has, which to me was pretty interesting. I wish they would bring that back at some point, but I don't see them doing it. But a few films, like the Rebirth of Mothra 3 and GMK, did bring back the antler-looking horns, which was another interesting look for King Ghidorah. Just made it very unique and just great. Just a great monster, great looking monster, and just one of the most memorable of all time. It's appeared many times in media, and yeah, I'm just gushing over King Ghidorah, but Hey, that's one of my favorite monsters ever in the whole franchise. So let's move to special effects. Special effects in this movie are top notch for the Showa era. Uh, they have some great sets, mainly countryside sets, like I said, but they have great geography to them. We have sloping hills. We have still have epic things like bridges and mountains that crumble. Not like just plain ass ones, because there's Megalon, which is completely flat land for miles. And also we get some great city destruction scenes also. So those always look fantastic. Uh, the only quarrels I have, like I said, with the in the modern day, looking back, the budget blown on King Ghidorah's first initial appearance did affect other things in a certain sense, namely Godzilla's breath. As people always criticize in the movie, he has a steam breath, which he would never again have after this movie. And yeah, it's kind of distracting, and it also makes probably the only Showa Godzilla the only Showa era movie where Godzilla only uses his breath like I think maybe twice in the whole movie. He doesn't use it at all against King Ghidorah in this one. It won't use it on him to Invasion of Astro Monster, which he only used it like once or twice to both to no times to no effect. And then the same thing here, Godzilla's breath has no effect on Rodan, but it has less of an impact because, like I said, it looks like steam or a jet of water than actual atomic breath. But that's a minor quarrel that I can easily get over. Uh, some of the hand puppet scenes of Godzilla and Rodan fighting from long shots are kind of not needed when they simply could have used the suits, in my opinion. But overall, though, the fights are very energetic. They have some great shots. One of my favorite action scenes of all time got to be Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah coming together to fight, and you get some great like, aerial battle shots between Rodan and King Ghidorah. Those are fantastic. And unlike the fights in something like Godzilla vs. Mothra in the 90s, these characters actually moved around a whole lot more than the very stiff Mothra and Batra marionettes. So, you know, sometimes it's good to look at the past to learn a lot of what you should be doing instead of just, you know, oh, I think this is going to look great on film. Pay attention to what's been done in the past, because you could probably learn a thing or two. But in any case, the movie has great fights, great special effects, and it holds up very well to me over time. Really does. Uh, it should be noted this because the movie brought the first essences of campiness to the Godzilla franchise, and I specifically mean comedic moments between the monsters. Uh, Godzilla and Rodan's battle, while definitely very good and energetic, and having some interesting moments like dropping Godzilla on power lines and hit each other with rocks, it's definitely more of a slapstick kind of fight in a sense. That a lot of the things that happen are kind of like kind of funny in a certain way. Like Rodan biting Godzilla's tail, and you see him shaking his head like, ah, Jesus, that hurts, and just stuff like that. It's very interesting the way they did it. And of course, later on, they had the Monster Summit itself. We have almost just very funny shots of like Godzilla and Rodan fighting each other, and Mothra having to spray them to get them to stop and finally listen to her message. Uh, to me, the cheesiness and here is to me it's at tolerable levels. I mean, these are giant monster movies. They can't be, at least at the time, anyways. They could be serious forever. But we have giant space dragon that has no explanation. So to me, it wasn't a bad direction to go at the time. It just that it would get worse with other movies where Godzilla is just directly the hero. But here, to me, it maintains a good balance. Although they become Earth's heroes in this movie, like I said before earlier in this review, it's at a cost since they do kill people when they first arrive. So, if anything, you could call it a temporary alliance with the Earth itself. But to me, yeah, like I was saying, this is from writer Sekizawa, who wrote, I think, almost a majority of the show era. I think he kept on writing till right around Godzilla vs. Hedorah, I believe, if not a little before. But you can definitely see it's his writing in here. He doesn't short sell the human characters. He definitely delivers on the monster action. So this movie is definitely just to me, one of the best because it was in terms of human monster interaction, a good usable human storyline, great monster action. For Godzilla and Rodan, not the best looking monsters, but good enough to tell the story without distraction, which matters. Some movies like Godzilla Sea Monster and Godzilla versus, Son of Godzilla would forget that and have Godzilla fight, decent looking opponents and then look like shit himself, which is horrible. Don't do that. Uh, so, what's the lasting impact of this movie compared to the rest of the movies that came before and after it? As far as setting up epic showdowns, this Godzilla movie definitely went the farthest at the time, and the farthest that a lot of the movies afterwards struggled to even come close to. Of course, the movie would be done out by Destroy All Monsters. Of course, with it's like more than double the monsters seen here. But the majority of the time in the Showa series, only the most you could get was a 2-on-2 matchup. And here, I think, is a lot more interesting, especially since we have very different fighting and more animalistic, for the most part. Then we get the karate type scenes, like with Skygan, or because it was Megalon, especially when it's really bad. But yeah, and of course, the movie introduces us to King Ghidorah, so that just speaks volumes. A character, like I said, who would appear so many times in not only just this series, but Millennium. And eventually, King would be so popular, he'd be used in the Mothra trilogy in the 90s. Movies that had nothing to do with Godzilla, but they used Ghidorah like villains, and then Ghidorah himself in the third and final Rebirth of Mothra movie. But so overall, what my grade of this movie is, I definitely give this movie a 9 out of 10. For me, it's always been a 9 out of 10, just because little quarrels like Godzilla's breath, and those things can be kind of distracting at times. But overall, though, it still holds together. It's definitely one of the best of the Showa movies to me. It will forever be on the top 10 for me. Nothing can replace it, unless the new one's really freaking good, 2018, or for 2016 for that matter. But at a certain point, you got to cut it off. Nothing can really push this one off the top 10 list for me. It's such a freaking good movie, and such a good example of an epic kaiju film. I'm just really glad Honda gave this one to us. I may not forget to thank Honda. And, basically, well, this is not the same for Falls by Tomoyuki Tanaka producing, Honda directing. If Kube did an amazing score for this movie. And then, of course, we had Subaraya. I almost forgot. Shame on me. Subaraya doing the special effects, which they came out so freaking good. And, of course, if you want to add the fifth, we had Sekizawa as the writer, and a sixth, Nakajima as Godzilla. Those things combined just usually made a very good Godzilla movie in the 50s and the 60s. And it was a shame that after Invasion of Astro Monster, things would, be spotty here and there, and then they had one last epic collaboration with Destroy All Monsters before things finally died off. At least between all four of them, working together. But this movie definitely had a very lasting impact on my childhood as an epic action movie. And, like I said, it's just great. The epic shots, music is fantastic. This movie delivered us King Ghidorah's badass theme, which just sounds freaking great. Rodan finally gets the dun 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 dun. That's so famous, because if you didn't know, in 1956, Rodan had a very different theme that was definitely more horror inspired. He was more of a, like I said, more of a menace in that movie himself. He was the main villain, so he definitely needed a very different theme. And here he gets, a more direct and shorter theme, but it still works very well, and it's iconic. And of course, as well before the Godzilla March, so we get the same one we mostly got in Mothra vs. Godzilla, but without the notes of tragedy in it, like we had in Mothra vs. Godzilla at times during Rampage. We hear that dun 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 dun. We don't get that in this one because, like I said, it's not focused on the tragedy of the monster rampage. It's just straightforward action, but it works in this movie. And I'm very happy we got this one. Like I said, we keep gushing on this. This has been a very fun review for me. I love covering this movie. And like I said, hopefully 2018 does this movie justice. Gareth Edwards, don't fuck it up. But I trust in you, man. I trust in you.